Hello, my name is Mirhat Sharifjan and welcome to Eurasian Express, a YouTube channel dedicated to history, culture, languages, geopolitics, and major developments across Eurasia. And first of all, let me congratulate everyone who today marks and celebrates Eid al-Adha. Qurban Eid qabul bolsun. Qurban Bayram Mubarak. Today, May 27, 2026, Russian President Vladimir Putin is visiting Astana, which of course has nothing to do with Eid al-Adha. Officially, the visit was announced as the state visit of the Russian leader to Kazakhstan. Actually, it is the second state visit in the last 18 months. Also, the visit is connected to the summit of the Eurasian Economic Union, of which Armenia, Belarus, and Kyrgyzstan are also member states. In reality, this summit carries much deeper geopolitical and historical symbolism, I would say, because Putin is arriving in a country that increasingly presents itself as the heir of the Golden Horde and the Ulus of Jochi. And this surely changes the entire symbolic context of the meeting. Well, we have to remember that less than a week before Putin's arrival to Astana, the Kazakh capital hosted an international symposium devoted to the legacy of the Golden Horde, at which Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev again stressed the importance of the Golden Horde for many countries in Eurasia, and also stressed that Kazakhstan, as well as some other countries in Central Asia and elsewhere across the continent, are direct successors of the Golden Horde. Well, let's see who Jochi was. Ulus of Jochi. Well, Jochi was the eldest son of Chinggis Khan. His life was very controversial from the very beginning. Before Jochi's birth, Chinggis Khan's wife, Börte, was kidnapped by a rival tribe, the Merkits. So Börte spent several months in captivity before she was released, joined her husband, and shortly delivered a child, a boy whose name was Jochi. Although Chinggis Khan officially adopted Jochi as his own son, rumors about his origin followed him all his life, his entire life, until his death, we would say. And very often, that controversy contributed to tensions within the ruling dynasty. Well, nevertheless, Jochi became one of the key figures of the expanding empire of Chinggis Khan. Jochi participated in major military campaigns and eventually received control of the empire's western territories. Those lands became known as the Ulus of Jochi, and this territory was enormous. Well, again, Ulus means territory or property or country. So it covered much of present-day Kazakhstan, regions extending toward Eastern Europe, parts of what we call today Southern Russia, Volga region, Crimea, and other parts of today's Ukraine, as well as Western Siberia and parts of today's Western China. After Jochi's death around 1225, his descendants continued to rule these territories, and over time the Ulus of Jochi evolved into what later became known as the Golden Horde, Altyn Orda. But here lies a crucial point often overlooked in traditional Russian historiography. Although founded by Mongol conquerors, the Golden Horde gradually became heavily Turkicized. Turkic tribes already dominated the Eurasian steppe before the Mongol invasions. The Mongol elite mixed with local Turkic populations, adopted Turkic languages, and eventually embraced Islam. Over time, the Golden Horde transformed into a powerful Turkic Islamic Eurasian state. And this is precisely why modern Kazakhstan is increasingly sees the Golden Horde not as a foreign empire, but I would say as part of its own historical and political ancestry. Well, this interpretation became especially significant after statements made years ago by Vladimir Putin. In 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea from Ukraine, Putin publicly stated that Kazakhs allegedly, quote unquote, never had statehood before modern times. At the same time, the Kremlin increasingly promoted the idea that Ukraine itself was an artificial state created by Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union. Years later, those historical narratives became part of the ideological justification for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is still ongoing. And Kazakhstan watched all of this extremely carefully, because many in Astana understood historical narratives in Eurasia are no longer merely academic discussions. They can become geopolitical instruments. And this is one of the major reasons Kazakhstan intensified its promotion of the legacy of Jochi's Ulus and the Golden Horde. But today there is another extraordinary layer of symbolism. Historically, rulers of the Russian principalities often traveled to the Golden Horde in order to receive the Yarlik, official permission from the Khans to rule. In many ways, the rise of Moscow itself took place within the political framework established by the Golden Horde. And now history produces a remarkable irony. Today, the ruler of Russia, Vladimir Putin, arrives in Astana, the capital of a state which increasingly presenting itself as the successor of that same Golden Horde. The symbolism is difficult to ignore, especially because this visit happens at the moment when Russia appears to need Kazakhstan more than Kazakhstan needs Russia. Because Russia's geopolitical position has changed dramatically since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. The war has now lasted for more than 4 years. Despite enormous military pressure, Ukrainian forces continue resisting. Russia remains under heavy sanctions. Its economy faces growing long-term challenges. Its international isolation in the West has deepened. And Moscow's authority across parts of the post-Soviet space no longer looks as absolute as it once did. That is why Kazakhstan has become critically important for the Kremlin. Russia needs stable relations with Kazakhstan for several reasons. Well, Kazakhstan shares one of the longest land borders in the world with Russia. Kazakhstan remains crucial for regional trade routes, transportation, and sanctions circumvention mechanisms. Also, Moscow cannot afford geopolitical instability in Central Asia while simultaneously fighting a prolonged war in Ukraine. Also, Russia understands that its influence in Central Asia is increasingly contested by other players, such as China, Turkey, the European Union, and other international actors. And perhaps most importantly, the Kremlin needs to demonstrate that Eurasian integration projects still matter, that Russia still has allies, such as Kazakhstan and other members of the Eurasian Economic Union. As I mentioned before, Armenia, Belarus, and Kyrgyzstan. That Moscow remains a major center of gravity in Eurasia. And Kazakhstan, we can say that Kazakhstan looks indispensable for that image. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan's room for maneuver has expanded. Astana maintains close relations with Russia, but simultaneously deepens cooperation with China, Europe, the United States, Turkey, and the broader Turkic world. Kazakhstan no longer appears as dependent on Moscow as it once did. and Tokayev clearly understands this changing balance. That is why his recent statements about the Golden Horde were aimed not only at international audiences, but also at domestic audiences inside Kazakhstan. Tokayev increasingly faces pressure from nationalist-minded intellectuals in Kazakhstan and segments of Kazakh society demanding stronger protection of Kazakhstan's sovereignty, language, and historical identity. Many critics inside Kazakhstan long viewed former President Nursultan Nazarbayev as too cautious toward Moscow. Nazarbayev carefully balanced relations with Russia while generally avoiding highly sensitive historical themes that could provoke the Kremlin. Tokayev appears to be going somewhat further, very carefully, very gradually, but noticeably further. By publicly emphasizing that Kazakhstan is one of the heirs of the Golden Horde and the Ulus of Jochi, Tokayev demonstrates several things simultaneously. He shows domestic audience that Kazakhstan possesses deep historical roots independent from Russia. He presents himself as a stronger defender of national identity than many expected when he first came to power. He signals that Kazakhstan is confident enough to promote its own interpretation of Eurasian history, even under conditions of enormous Russian pressure. And finally, Tokayev strengthens his own legitimacy after the tragic events of January 2022, when unrest shook the country and Tokayev invited Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization forces to enter Kazakhstan to establish law and order. Since then, Tokayev has tried to carry out a number of public relations programs. Well, in a way to justify violence, maybe. The violence that led to at least 238 deaths in January 2022, the events known among Kazakh as Kantar or Bloody Kantar, and carefully rebuild the image of a sovereign leader capable of balancing powerful external forces while defending Kazakhstan's independence. The Golden Horde narrative fits perfectly into that strategy, because this is not simply about medieval history. It is about sovereignty, it is about identity, it is about political legitimacy. And most importantly, it is about who has the right to define the historical future of Eurasia. That is why Putin's arrival in Astana today, May 27, looks symbolically so important. The Russian president arrives in the capital of a country increasingly reclaiming the legacy of the very empire before which Russian princes once sought legitimacy. And in today's geopolitical climate, that symbolism carries enormous weight. Okay, my name is Mirhat Sharipjan, and again, congratulations to all who celebrate Eid al-Adha. Thank you for watching Eurasian Express. Please subscribe if you like this narrative and analysis. Click like, leave your comments below, and see you next time. Sağ salamat bolunuzlar. Amandıq pен кездесейік.